The first time Grace met him, it was raining hard and the emergency room smelled like iodine and soaked wool. She had just come off a double shift, her scrubs clinging to her knees, a dull ache pulsing behind her eyes. The clock read 3:17 a.m. when she saw the door swing open, bringing in a gust of wind and the kind of silence that follows a sudden loss. He walked in behind a stretcher, not on it but near enough to be broken by what it carried. His shoulders were squared like he was trying to hold something inside. His hair was wet, dark brown curls pressed flat by the rain, his jaw tight and unmoving. Grace knew that expression. People wore it when they were still trying to make sense of what had just happened. The girl on the stretcher, Emily Walsh, 19, had been in a head-on collision, internal bleeding, no seatbelt. She coded twice before they reached the trauma bay, and Grace was part of the team that tried to pull her back. She held the crash cart steady as the doctor barked orders, counted compressions with her breath, and willed the line on the monitor to find a rhythm. It never did. They called it at 3:39. The man waited in the hallway, still soaked, still silent. When Grace stepped out, she found herself walking toward him before she had time to think. Not because it was her job, not really. She was off the clock, but something about the way he stood there, so still in the middle of the storm, told her he needed someone to say it plainly. "I'm sorry," she said, voice low, steady, the one she reserved for impossible truths. "Emily didn't make it." He looked at her then, really looked. His eyes were the gray-blue of winter skies, and in that moment they were wide with disbelief, red at the corners. She could almost see the weight of her words settle on him. "She was my sister," he said. His voice was hoarse, as if he'd run all the way there with her name in his throat. "I was on the phone with her when it happened." Grace nodded, not saying she was sorry again, not trying to soften it. He didn't need softness. He needed someone to hold the truth without turning away. "I'm Grace," she offered, because names were anchors, and right now he looked like he was drifting. "Caleb," he said. That was it, no wailing, no questions, just his name handed to her like a fragile thing. He left an hour later, still in the same rain-soaked clothes. She watched him go from the nurse's station, unsure why the echo of his footsteps lingered so long after he disappeared. 2 days later, he was back. He showed up at the hospital just after visiting hours started. His coat was dry this time, but his eyes were tired. He didn't ask for anyone, just sat in the small waiting area across from the nurse's desk in oncology where Grace had been reassigned that week. He sat there for over an hour, reading nothing, scrolling through nothing, talking to no one. But when Grace passed by to deliver meds to a patient in 12B, he smiled at her, just once, just softly, a small lift of the lips. She nodded, unsure if he was there for someone or simply there. The next day he came again, sat in the same spot, brought a coffee and drank it slowly, watching the hallway like he expected it to change. Grace glanced at him twice, maybe 3 times. His gaze followed her the way someone watches a fire in a dark room, like he didn't need warmth, just proof that something was still alive. By the end of the week, every nurse on her floor had noticed him. Some speculated he was waiting for news. Others assumed he was grieving and didn't know where else to go. But Grace, she knew he wasn't lost. He was coming back for something specific. And when she passed by on Friday and offered him a real smile, one that reached her eyes even after 12 hours on her feet, he smiled back with something like relief. "You okay?" she asked when her shift ended, walking up to where he sat. He blinked up at her like he'd been caught dreaming. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I think I feel better when I see you." She didn't know what to say to that, not really. So she sat down in the chair beside him, leaned back, and let the silence between them settle like snow. His visits became routine. Sometimes he brought a book, other times just himself. He never asked for anything, didn't try to force conversation. But every day when Grace walked by, his eyes found her, and her steps slowed. She started bringing 2 coffees instead of one. "You don't have to," he told her the first time. "I know," she said, setting it beside him anyway, "but maybe I want to." A week later, she found herself telling him about her father's heart attack. How she was only 17 when it happened. How she sat in a hospital room just like this one, watching a nurse speak gently to her mother, and decided that maybe compassion was more powerful than medicine. "I didn't think I'd stay in nursing," she admitted, surprised at herself for saying so much. "I thought it would hurt too much." He didn't tell her she was strong, he didn't tell her she was brave, he just listened, eyes steady, heart open. "I think you stayed because you know how it feels to lose," he said finally, "and you don't want anyone to be alone in it." That night she cried in her car for the first time in years, not out of sadness, out of recognition, out of the quiet way his words had found something hidden in her and named it. The next morning he was there before her shift started, coffee waiting on the bench. "You're early," she said, surprised. "I wanted to see you smile," he said simply, handing her the cup. She didn't know how something so gentle could make her heart ache, but it did. The nurses began to call him Grace's shadow, joked that he was her unofficial therapy patient, but none of them saw the way she breathed easier when he was there, or how his presence, quiet and unwavering, began to stitch something back together inside her. Caleb didn't talk much about Emily, but every so often he'd mention her laugh or the way she used to sing off-key in the car. Grace listened, held those stories like folded paper cranes. She never rushed him, never asked for more than he offered. Some nights after she clocked out, they'd walk to the corner diner. Share fries, talk about nothing. The kind of nothing that only happens between people who are learning how to exist beside each other. He never tried to kiss her, never reached for her hand, but there was something between them, something warm and slow-growing, that felt like more than friendship. Like two people learning how to be soft again after the world had gone sharp. Then one day, he didn't come. Grace checked the waiting room 3 times, made excuses to pass by, felt her heart catch every time the door opened and it wasn't him. By the end of her shift, something in her felt frayed. He didn't come the next day either. Or the day after that. She told herself not to worry, maybe he was just taking space. Maybe grief had pulled him sideways, but the hollow in her chest said otherwise. When he finally returned, 5 days later, his eyes were darker than she remembered. He looked tired, raw. "Hey," she said, breath catching with something she didn't name. He sat beside her in the break room, hands clasped, eyes on the floor. "My parents are selling the house," he said quietly. "The one Emily and I grew up in. I was there helping pack, found some of her old sketchbooks." Grace waited. "She used to draw all the time, said she wanted to be a tattoo artist. I forgot that." He lifted his head and something broke open in his expression. "I forgot that," he repeated, like he was trying to forgive himself. Grace reached over, slow, careful, let her hand rest on his. "You didn't forget," she said, "you just buried it for a while." His fingers curled around hers. And for the first time since the rain-soaked morning when they met, he let himself cry. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of grief that comes when you've held yourself together too long and someone finally offers a place to fall apart. She didn't say anything else, just stayed with him, held his hand as the minutes passed. And when the tears stopped and his breathing evened, he looked at her with something new in his eyes. Something like hope. "Do you believe people can heal?" he asked her softly. Grace considered it. "Yes," she said finally, "but I don't think it's about forgetting the pain. I think it's about finding something or someone that makes the pain worth carrying." He nodded, then quietly, "You make it easier." She didn't smile, not then, but she didn't look away. Because somehow, in the quiet spaces between heartbeats and hospital shifts, something had begun to bloom. And neither of them was running from it. Caleb didn't ask for her number, Grace didn't offer it. Whatever was forming between them was tied to the hospital, the steady rhythm of her shifts, the waiting room chair he claimed like a silent promise. There was something sacred about it, a ritual built on shared presence rather than plans. Still, after that day in the break room, after he cried in front of her and she didn't flinch, something shifted. Their conversations deepened, stretching like the long shadows of late afternoon. Grace found herself lingering after work, sitting with him beneath the old ficus in the hospital courtyard, the one that somehow thrived despite poor soil and constant wind. He told her about growing up in a small town outside of Fairhaven, about sneaking into drive-in movies with Emily, bringing popcorn in old backpacks and pretending not to care when the security guard caught them. About how she had this reckless streak, a way of making everything feel like an adventure. How he'd been the careful one, the older brother, always worried, always watching. "I spent so much time trying to protect her," he said one evening as the first chill of fall drifted through the air, "and I couldn't protect her from that." Grace didn't say it wasn't his fault. She didn't offer platitudes about fate or randomness. She just sat closer on the bench, let her shoulder brush his, grounding him. He glanced at her. "Why do you keep showing up for me?" "Because you keep showing up for me too," she said. He didn't answer right away. Then, "Even when I don't have anything to give." She looked at him, really looked. "You give more than you realize." And maybe he did, with every quiet morning he waited, with every story he shared only with her, with every moment he looked at her like she was worth the light, even after a night shift stole all her strength. One rainy Wednesday, she passed him in the hallway between oncology and pediatrics. He was carrying a tray with 2 coffees and a small brown bag. He didn't say a word, just handed her the bag. She opened it to find a blueberry muffin, still warm. I remembered you said you skipped breakfast on Wednesdays, he said almost shyly. She smiled, holding the bag close like it was something fragile. He wasn't always there. Some days he stayed away and Grace learned not to ask why, but when he returned, it was always with a presence that settled something inside her. She started thinking about him outside the hospital, started noticing how quiet her apartment felt without the echo of his voice in her mind. The other nurses noticed too. Your guy's back, Eva teased one morning. He's not my guy, Grace said too quickly. Eva raised a brow. He brings you muffins and watches you like he's memorizing the way your nose crinkles when you laugh. If he's not your guy, he missed the memo. Grace didn't reply, she just turned back to her chart, cheeks warm. But that night, as she lay awake staring at the ceiling fan spin its slow circles, she thought about how true it felt. Caleb wasn't hers, but maybe, just maybe, he was becoming something. One Thursday afternoon, she found him in the chapel. It was a small, rarely used room with faded cushions and a window that looked out over the parking lot. He sat in the third row, elbows on his knees, fingers laced. She hesitated at the doorway. He didn't turn, but he spoke. I didn't used to believe in anything, he said, still not sure I do. Grace stepped inside quietly, sat beside him. But this place, it makes you wonder, doesn't it, he went on, about what stays behind, about what we hold. She nodded. I think sometimes we pray without knowing it, just by hoping or showing up. He glanced at her and something passed between them, not quite a question, not quite an answer. You're the first person I've let close since she died, he said. Grace folded her hands in her lap, heart steady. I know. He looked away and she thought maybe that was it. Another moment passed, then he asked, does that scare you? No, she said softly, it honors me. After that, their moments grew longer. They found pockets of time, little spaces between shifts and sorrows. Once they walked to the waterfront just as the sky turned lavender, the tide breathing in and out like something half asleep. She told him about her mother, who still called every Sunday at 7 p.m. sharp, even when they had nothing to say. About the way she sometimes doubted whether she was meant for love. He stopped walking then, turned to face her. Don't say that, he said quietly. You love people every day, every hour you work, every patient you comfort. She looked down at her shoes. Grace, he said, and the way he said her name made her meet his eyes. You are made of love. Her breath caught, she didn't know what to do with something so tender. So she whispered, then why do I feel so lonely? He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, the ache and ache and ache of him. Maybe you just haven't been seen the right way. She closed her eyes. And in the stillness, she felt it. The weight of all she'd carried, the grief she'd swallowed down to keep others afloat, the quiet need to be held. When she opened them, he was still there, still watching her like she was something sacred. They didn't kiss, not then, but he reached out, touched her cheek with the back of his fingers. It was the gentlest thing anyone had done in years. And she lined into it. The next week he brought her a small, potted plant, something green and trailing with a little tag that read string of hearts. Thought you could use something that lasts, he said. She didn't cry, not right away. But later at home, she sat on her kitchen floor and held the pot in her hands and let herself feel everything at once. Hope, fear, the terrifying beauty of being seen. There were setbacks. One night after 2 weeks of steady presence, he didn't come. Then another day passed, and another. When he finally showed up, something was different. His shoulders were hunched, and there was a fresh scar along his knuckle, as if he'd punched something hard. She found him outside by the loading dock, smoking a cigarette that looked awkward in his hand. I messed up, he said before she could ask. Tell me. He shook his head. I went to her grave, tried to leave a letter, couldn't do it, ended up throwing it into the creek. Grace stepped closer. Why? Because I was afraid she'd think I was moving on. Grace felt the ache of that, deep and personal. You're not moving on, she said, you're moving with her. He looked up. She's still with you, Grace added, but you're allowed to let someone else in. His eyes softened. You think she'd forgive me? I think she already has. He dropped the cigarette, stepped on it, then reached out, almost uncertain, and took her hand. And this time, she let him. They stood there in the cooling air, fingers interlaced, two people learning that healing wasn't linear, that sometimes you step backward before moving forward again. And maybe, just maybe, love wasn't something you earned. Maybe it was something you offered frailly, gently, again and again. They didn't name what they were, not yet. But every day after that, he came back. Not just for her smile, but for the way it made him feel like something inside him was still worth saving. Autumn settled around the hospital like a hush. Mornings came darker, breath clouded in the air before sunrise, and the city seemed to sigh into itself. Grace adjusted her routines, warmer scrubs layered under her coat, tea instead of iced coffee, and the habit of checking the waiting room before even clocking in. Caleb was there most days now, but not always. He never told her he would be, never promised consistency. Still, when he wasn't in that familiar chair, she felt it like a misstep on the stairs. When he was there, something in her chest unknotted. They begun walking to her car after her shift ended, even on the days she looked half asleep, even when neither of them said much. Once, when her hands were trembling from exhaustion, he simply reached over and took her clipboard, held it without question until they reached the elevator. "You don't have to take care of me," she said one night when he offered her his scarf against the wind. "I know," he said, "but I want to." The words landed with quiet force. She wasn't used to being wanted like that, not for comfort or company, just wanted. As if her tired eyes and scarred hands and stories too heavy for polite conversation were things someone could choose. But that's what Caleb did, chose her, in small, steady ways. She started bringing extra soup in a thermos. He started carrying a book of poetry in his coat pocket, the pages dog-eared and soft. Some nights they'd sit in her car and read aloud with the windows fogging up and the heater rattling like a tired heart. He always picked the poems about longing, about loss and light, and the things we carry even when we want to let them go. One evening, he looked at her differently. Not with hunger or hesitation, but like he'd come to a decision he didn't know how to speak. She tilted her head. "What?" He traced the rim of his coffee cup. "I want to do something with my grief." Grace sat forward slightly. "I've been thinking about how Emily used to talk about opening a studio one day," he continued. "Not just for tattoos, she wanted it to be a space for people who didn't feel seen, kids who didn't have anyone, people who needed something permanent to remind them of who they were." "She told you that?" He nodded. "The night before she died, actually." Grace swallowed. "I want to open it," he said, "for her, with her name on the door." Grace felt her chest expand with something close to awe. "I don't know where to start," he added, voice quieter now, "but I want it to matter." "You'll figure it out," she said, "you always do." He gave her a look half disbelieving, half grateful. "You have too much faith in me." "No," she said, "I have the right amount." And for the first time, he leaned forward and kissed her. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't rushed, just a soft meeting of mouths in the quiet cocoon of her car. But it lit something steady inside her, not fire but warmth, a warmth that stayed. Afterward they just sat there, breathing, letting the moment settle around them like snow. Neither of them spoke about it the next day or the day after that. They didn't need to. The shape of their closeness had changed. There was more laughter between them now, more stillness too. And slowly, the rest of the world began to creep in. Caleb started meeting with a business advisor, looked into vacant spaces. Grace helped him build a spreadsheet, laughed when he squinted at formulas like they were written in a foreign language. She found herself dreaming differently, letting herself imagine mornings that didn't begin with alarms and antiseptic, but with coffee in a sunlit kitchen and someone who knew when her silences meant tired and when they meant overwhelmed. But real life has a way of reminding you that healing isn't all soft landings. It started with a call from her mother. Her uncle was in the hospital back in her hometown, complications from diabetes. She needed to come home for a few days, maybe a week. Caleb drove her to the train station, carried her bag like it weighed more than just clothes. At the platform, he pulled her into a hug that lasted longer than it needed to, his hand resting at the base of her spine like it belonged there. "Promise me you'll come back," he said quietly. "I will." "And if you do," he asked, only half joking. "Then you'll have to come find me," she said, smiling. He touched her face just once, then stepped back, letting her go. The train pulled away, and she kept her eyes on him until the platform blurred. Being home was harder than she expected. The hospital there was smaller, quieter, full of memories she hadn't meant to revisit. The nurses still remembered her from when she shadowed as a teenager. Her mother made her tea every night, but it didn't taste like the kind Caleb made. Nothing did. She stayed 5 days. On the 6th, her uncle stabilized and she returned. But when she walked through the hospital doors back in the city, Caleb wasn't there. At first, she assumed he was running late, but by the end of her shift, the familiar ache had returned. 2 days passed, then three. She tried not to panic. On the fourth night, she opened her apartment door to find a box waiting for her. Inside was a notebook, a small key, and a note written in Caleb's neat, uneven handwriting. "I'm not gone, I just needed to build something. The key is for the space, I signed the lace. I wanted you to be the first to see it. Come tomorrow after your shift if you want to. I'll see you." Her hands shook as she held the note. The next evening, she went. It was a small building off Baxter and Fifth, the glass front still dusty, the floors bare, but inside, hanging on the back wall, was a sketch, one of Emily's, framed. And standing beneath it, looking nervous and hopeful, and every bit the boy who once cried beside her in a chapel, was Caleb. "I didn't want to wait anymore," he said, "to live, to love, to believe in something again." Grace walked toward him slowly. "I didn't want to lose you," he added, voice cracking. "You haven't," she said. And when she reached him, she took his hand, pressed it to her heart. "I'm right here," she whispered, "and I'm not going anywhere." This time when he kissed her, it was the kind that promises a future. The studio smelled like sawdust and fresh paint for weeks. Grace helped him clean it out on her days off, her sleeves rolled up, a bandana holding back her curls, her laughter echoing off the empty walls. Caleb moved with purpose, quieter than usual but lighter somehow, as if creating this space had given his grief a direction, a way forward. They painted the walls a soft slate blue, the kind of color that seemed to catch light differently depending on the time of day. Caleb insisted on building the counter himself, measuring twice and still sawing too short once, swearing under his breath until Grace handed him a cup of tea and told him to breathe. He'd found more of Emily's artwork in a box at his parents' place. Grace watched him sort through the drawings with reverence, touching each one like a prayer. Some were wild and colorful, full of chaotic lines and vivid people. Others were tender, black and white sketches of hands and hearts and old boots. He chose 5 to frame. "We'll rotate them out," he told her. "Let her be part of the place." Grace nodded. She'd love that. "I think she would have liked you too," he said, glancing at her. Something caught in her throat. "You think?" He smiled faintly. "I know." Outside, the first snow came early. Just a dusting, soft and tentative, like the season wasn't sure it wanted to settle yet, but it made everything feel quieter, more tender. The city itself seemed to hold its breath. One morning before her shift, Caleb walked her to the hospital doors and kissed her forehead. A simple thing, an unspoken promise. Inside, the hallways were humming, full of end-of-year buzz, patients preparing for winter, families bringing in blankets and holiday cards. Grace moved through her rounds with practiced care, but she felt different, like she was carrying something sweet just under her ribs. The other nurses noticed. "You're glowing," Eva teased, handing her a stack of charts. "I think it's just the heater," Grace replied, but her smile gave her away. Later that week, Caleb surprised her with a hand-drawn sketch, a line drawing of the ficus tree from the hospital courtyard, the one they always sat under. She traced the delicate ink strokes with her fingers. "You drew this." He shrugged, shy, used to sketch a little. Emily was better, but I wanted to try. She looked up at him, heart full. "It's beautiful." So was he in moments like this, when his vulnerability showed itself in quiet offerings, no grand declarations, just small things, steady things, a key, a note, a drawing that said, "I see you." The studio opened quietly on a Saturday in mid-December. No ribbon cutting, no crowd, just Grace and Caleb, a few friends, and a space full of warmth. He named it the Ink House. Underneath, in smaller letters, it read, "In memory of Emily Walsh." There were shelves with books about art and healing, a wall of Polaroids he'd started taking of visitors who came to share their stories, a small desk in the back where he began sketching tattoos, gentle ones, symbolic ones. A feather for a woman who lost her son, a compass for a young man in recovery. Caleb didn't rush, he listened. He asked questions like, "What do you want to carry forward? And what reminds you that you survived?" Grace watched him become something new in that space, not just the grieving brother, but someone quietly guiding others through their own healing. It moved her, seeing him give so much of himself, seeing how much he'd grown. They still met most days, still read poetry in the car, still walked with their shoulders touching, but it wasn't about routine anymore. It was about choosing each other, day after day. One evening in late January, she came home to find a note taped to her door. "You've been caring for everyone else. Tonight let me take care of you. See." She opened the door to candlelight, the soft scent of something simmering in her kitchen. Caleb had cooked, not much, a simple soup, warm bread, and a small lemon tart she'd once mentioned loving. He was awkward about it, apologizing for burning the edges, but she could barely hear him over the thudding of her own heart. They ate on the floor, no table, no music, just the flicker of candlelight and the soft sound of snow outside. After dinner, he held her. On the couch, her head on his chest, his hand resting over her heart like he could steady it just by being near. "I want to ask you something," he said. Her eyes opened, "Okay." "It's not a proposal," he said quickly, smiling against her hair, "but it might sound like one." She shifted to face him. "I want you to be part of the studio," he said. "Not just helping out, I mean, really part of it. We could start a program, art therapy maybe, or a quiet corner for nurses, healthcare workers, anyone who needs space." Grace stared at him. "You help people carry grief every day," he said. "I want this place to do that too, and I want to do it with you." She was quiet for a moment, not because she didn't know what to say, but because it was the first time someone had invited her to build a life with them, instead of asking her to fit inside theirs. "I'd love that," she said. He kissed her slower this time, with more certainty. And something clicked into place. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it felt like a turning point, the kind you feel in your bones before you name it out loud. Afterward, she traced circles on his wrist with her fingertip. "Do you ever think," she asked softly, "about the moment we met?" "All the time," he said. "I hated giving bad news," she whispered. "Still do." "I hated hearing it," he replied. "Still do." And yet here they were, on the other side of it. Not past the grief, but rooted in it, shaped by it, and still choosing to love anyway. Outside, the snow kept falling, quiet and steady. Inside, their hearts did the same. Spring arrived slowly, as if the city itself was unsure how to let go of the cold. The trees along the sidewalks began to bud, tentative green against gray branches, and Grace found herself lingering at windows more often. Something about this season, the in-between of thaw and bloom, felt close to her skin. At the hospital, she moved through her shifts with the same precision, but people noticed a change. Not in her work, which was still as diligent and tender as ever, but in the quiet way she carried herself. Lighter, calmer, like she'd stopped waiting for the next thing to go wrong. Sometimes patients asked about the necklace she wore, a thin silver chain with a tiny ink bottle charm. She'd touch it without thinking, her smile soft. "It's from someone who reminds me that pain can become something beautiful." No one asked more than that, they didn't need to. At the ink house, things had grown quickly in ways they hadn't planned. Word spread quietly, people who'd lost someone, people who carried stories under their skin began to find their way through the glass doors. Caleb listened to them all. He drew slowly with purpose. No flash art, no rush, just marks that mattered. Grace joined every weekend. She led small group circles, grief journaling, art sessions, quiet meditations. Sometimes they cried together, sometimes they didn't speak at all, just created, just breathed. Caleb said watching her work was like seeing light find its way into a room that didn't know it had windows. She laughed when he said things like that, then kissed him so he'd stop before her cheeks got too warm. They still weren't the kind of couple who posted photos or wore matching anything, but they were unmistakably theirs. Intimate in the way they existed in quiet rooms, in the language of glances and the brushing of fingers while passing paintbrushes or stirring soup. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rolled in the distance, Caleb stood by the back window of the studio, staring at a wall they hadn't finished decorating. Grace walked up beside him. "What are you thinking?" "That it's missing something." She glanced at it bare, except for one framed sketch of Emily's and a shelf with candles that had burned down to nubs. "What kind of something?" she asked. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled something from his pocket, a folded piece of paper, aged at the edges. "I found this," he said, "in one of Emily's journals. I don't know when she wrote it, but it feels like something that should live here." He handed it to her. Grace unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was messy but clear. "I think love is what remains after everything else falls away. It's the hand you reach for when you're drowning, the warmth that stays, the eyes that don't look away. If someone loves you like that, hold on. It's rare, it's holy." Grace read it twice, then a third time. "You should frame it," she said, her voice thick. "I want to paint it," he replied, "on the wall, big." She looked at him, startled. He never painted anything on the walls. "Will you help me?" She nodded. They started that night. She penciled the letters and he painted them, his strokes deliberate and careful. It took hours. Their hands were speckled with paint, their backs sore from laning. But when they stepped back and saw it, Emily's words blooming across the wall, they didn't speak for a long time. Caleb slipped his arm around her waist. She was right, you know, he said. Grace leaned her head against his shoulder. About love. He nodded. And love wasn't the fireworks or the sweeping declarations. It was the mug of tea waiting on her nightstand when she got home late, the way he checked if she was warm enough in bed without waking her. The fact that he still came to the hospital sometimes, not because he needed to anymore, but because he knew she still did. One evening in May, after a long day at both the hospital and the studio, she walked into her apartment and stopped short. There were flowers, not many, just a few tucked into glass jars, wild and soft and mismatched like something gathered along the road. A trail of them led to the kitchen, where Caleb was standing with a pie he'd clearly burned. He looked sheepish. I tried, I really did. She laughed and stepped into his arms. It's beautiful. I have something for you, he said. Besides charcoal pie. He pulled a small, wrapped box from the counter, handed it to her with a look she couldn't quite read. Inside was a necklace, another one. This time the charm was a small silver heart, not perfect, not symmetrical, etched with two initials, G+C. Her breath caught. I know we haven't talked about labels or futures or what this is, he said, but I love you. I've loved you from the moment you told me the truth no one else could say. She didn't cry, not right away. I don't want to rush anything, he went on. I don't need a ring or a timeline. I just want to build something with you, keep building. Grace reached for him, her voice steady. You're already my home. And it was true, she'd never imagined love would arrive like this, quiet, patient, threaded through grief and late-night conversations and bruised mornings, but maybe that's why it lasted. Because it was earned, because it had grown. They danced that night in the kitchen. No music, just the sound of rain against the window and the soft rhythm of their breath. Months passed, the studio thrived. Patients at the hospital still whispered about Nurse Grace with the bright eyes and the man who sometimes came by with flowers tucked behind one ear. People started saying that place on Baxter and Fifth could heal you, not in the way a doctor could, but in the way that helped you breathe again, remember again, begin again. And in the corner of the studio, beneath the framed sketches and books and soft lamps, there hung a photograph. Grace and Caleb sitting beneath the ficus tree, his head resting against hers, eyes closed, peace written across his face. Her hand curled around his, their fingers laced like ivy. Below it, a small plaque. Some love begins in silence, some love begins with loss, but the love that stays. That's the kind that saves. And every time someone asked how the ink house came to be, Caleb would smile gently, motion to that wall, and say, It all started when she told me the worst thing I've ever heard. Then a pause, a breath. And somehow I came back the next day, just to see her smile again. And he always would.